I have with me Alison Tieman, and Alison is with an organization, a men's rights activist organization. And her website and blog is Honey Badger Brigade, and co-host of Honey Badger Radio. Alison, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Explain the Honey Badger for the folks. What is that exactly? What's the purpose?
Originally, the term honey badger was a nickname given to female men's rights activists. And in about August of 2013, I decided that I wanted to create a radio station that sort of the theme was women who are for men's rights talking about the issues. So I approached Karen Strawn, Girl Writes What, who I know has been on your program, and another friend of mine, Hannah Wallen, who's done a lot of research into institutional bias against men, legal bias against men. And we together formed a radio station. Originally, we were broadcast through a Voice for Men's blog talk platform. They gave us some space. And then we moved to YouTube. And now we are working on streaming to all kinds of different platforms. But essentially, the basic premise is a bunch of women who differ in a lot of their political beliefs. Me and Hannah and Karen, we all have we're on different spectrums of the politics, but come together to talk about men's issues and bring light to men's vulnerabilities in the issues facing men. What
was going on with men that would cause you guys to decide to reach out to them or try to help them? What was wrong? What was happening?
Well, there are a variety of different issues. Some people come in because of legal biases. Hannah has this incredibly harrowing story of a friend of hers who went through 7 years of a vexatious litigant who was enabled by the court system and by the shelter system in her location. And so Hannah came through based on legal issues, legal bias. Karen was more, I think, opposing the idea that the feminist idea that men are in charge because of bias against them and that they should be blamed for oppressing women. And she approaches it more like there are gender differences that indicate that it's more likely that men are going to be risk averse relative to women. So they're going to be drawn more to leadership positions. So it's not really a situation where men are actively going out and oppressing women, but that they're just more drawn to situations that women aren't drawn to. And so that's more her approach. So she was more against the feminist narrative of impugning malice, where just simple lack of interest and motivation might be more appropriate. Right. And my personal issues, I actually never experienced, prior to getting into men's issues, any of my male friends or relatives going through any of those particular issues. I had more of an academic interest in all of this stuff. I find it like it's almost like a secret knowledge that nobody talks about, and you don't get. There are, like, when I went to university, there were no seminars on it. Nobody was writing a master's thesis on it. The amount of books on it were tiny. That's just one small bookshelf, and but it felt to me like it was this is some knowledge that people don't want you to see, and I'm like, oh well, being who I am, I couldn't resist.
That's right. I read that you were a feminist at one time. Is that true?
Oh yeah, that's when I was younger. Although I'll qualify that, when I was a feminist, I was actually very much interested in political systems and also reciprocal responsibilities. So one of my major issues as a feminist was the lack of civic responsibility expected of women, or not an equal civic responsibility, because men are expected to go to make themselves available to the state in wartime to fulfill any labor or soldiering needs. Women weren't. And this was like my primary issue as a feminist. So I think I was fairly atypical. And one of the reasons I started to get away from feminism is I realized that I think I'm the only feminist who cares about this, who cares about the fact that women need to take responsibility too. And but what really set me, what made me sort of get more into feminism as I was at an all-girls school when I was 14 to 15, and they were very, very much feminist, and I sort of got that from all sides there.
Oh,
But
yeah.
when I came home, my mother, who had been a feminist in the 70s and the early 80s, but got away from it because of what she was seeing happening, prejudice against men, prejudice against grammar of all things. And and so she had been getting away from it. And when I came back, she was concerned that I was getting very dogmatic. So she gave me a book called A Princess at the Window to just sort of spark my curiosity about the other side of the equation. And I sort of haven't looked back since.
Amazing.
So that's, yeah.
Were you raised by your father and mother?
Yes, I was.
And-
Sorry, go ahead.
No, finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, my father was actually very involved. I think he probably was the typical, the 70s, 80s dad who wanted to be really involved with his kids. I think that's when it started, although I'm pretty sure that even earlier men were involved with their kids and wanted to be.
Right.
But yeah, he was, in a lot of ways, he was my primary parent growing up. For example, when I had issues with school, he would be the one who would tutor me and try to develop my ability to write and read and spell.
Great.
Yeah, so he actually created a program, Pac-Man program, that was like a spelling Pac-Man. So he was very primary in my early childhood. But yes, I was raised by my father and mother.
Was what is there like an overall thing that you, the ladies of this organization, want for men? What would you like to see change for men?
The change that we would like to see for men is very simple. We'd like to see a societal shift towards expressing and developing compassion for men, so that when we see men in need, we don't turn away and with disgust. And we start to recognize that men have needs, and actually when you step in and intervene with a man who's in crisis, oftentimes once the crisis is over and he's got that boost, he goes on to establish himself, get on his feet in terms of a job, in terms of getting a house, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So it's not an issue where you're feeding into like male helplessness. I don't think that's the case. It's that men still sometimes need that extra help, that extra rung up, just to get back on their feet.
What happened to men that they surrendered their rights or to be a man? And I noticed that most men don't fight back against that. How did they become so weak?
I'm not so sure if it's an issue of becoming. I think this is a situation where women have always had this strength and power. And there's been other times in our culture where we've recognized that women really define men. We have a more stable identity as women, and it's almost inevitable that men who, their primary model for a human being is their mother. And it's almost inevitable that they will model themselves either in opposition or in service or to protect that primary model of human.
But
So
isn't that a problem that their primary stable identity is their mothers? Because they start to act and think like women instead of like men, acting and thinking like a man. They think like their mothers are like a woman, and women don't like those kind of men. And
Well,
men are not happy being that way.
Well, okay, I'll try to break that up into the parts. Yes, men need to be able to differentiate from their mothers. I think in the process of differentiating, I think they become vulnerable to the kind of pressure to become overly service orientated or overly protection orientated. And that in turn makes them very vulnerable to women's opinions of them and their value of them. So I would agree that men very much need to be encouraged and have a framework in which they can grow away from defining themselves by women and women's value of them.
Alison, let me ask, is there a proper role for women and men in society today?
I think that I don't know if I want to talk about proper role, but responsibilities to each other's vulnerabilities. Like, I don't want to necessarily advocate for a situation where men are completely undefined by any kind of responsibility to women. But at the same time, I think that there should be reciprocal responsibilities that women have for men. So we should understand the vulnerabilities that men have and be aware of them and be responsible to them so that we don't exploit men and we don't. I mean, what I'm seeing today is an exploitation of men's vulnerabilities and an exploitation of men's identity. And I think that this is actually foundational to all of the conflict and the extremism and the strife that we're seeing politically. When you devalue a man for being a man, he turns to ideologies. He turns to simplistic belief systems to try to derive a value through service to those ideologies and belief systems. And then all nuance is lost. All sense of cooperation between men is lost. So you end up with this conflict where each group of men is trying to subjugate the other to become a hero because they see that other as the villain. And it all comes out of this shaming and devaluing of men as men.
Why are men so hated? And especially the white, straight, conservative Christian man of power, such as President Trump today. Why are they so hated?
Because I think it's easy to hate them, to be quite honest.
And why is it easy to hate them? Explain that when you say it's easy to hate them. What do you mean?
When we perceive a group of people to have a great deal of agency, it becomes very easy to erase that they also have vulnerabilities, that they also have feelings and emotions, and that they can be hurt because we see them as powerful. So it's easy to direct our hatred towards people that we perceive to be powerful. And it's actually sort of a catch-22. The more power a group is perceived to be, the less sympathy they get in society.
Yeah.
So we direct our hatred, we direct our anger towards them.
So when you say agency means power, right?
It means the ability to act. So not necessarily like political agency, it could be physical agency, it could be financial and social, just the ability to act.
So it sounds like the people who hate the men of power or agency, as you put it, it sounds like they're jealous of the men. And so rather than trying to understand why they're that way and how to become that way themselves, they want to destroy the men, destroy that.
I think there is an element of jealousy. I think there's also an element of inferiority because they have a denial of their own ability to act. In order to justify this behavior, you have to emphasize your own vulnerability, your own victimhood. And in the process of emphasizing your own vulnerability and your own victimhood, you lose a part of yourself.
Yeah.
A recognition of a part of yourself.
Should men, boys/men, should they get their identity from their mother or their father?
When I said that I think there's a tendency for men to base their identity on some aspect of women, either serving women or protecting women or defining themselves in relation to women, I didn't mean that as a good thing. I meant that as a thing that I think is almost unable to, we can't really change it to a large degree, but we can recognize it and we can make sure that we have the social institutions that allow men to have camaraderie, to take value from their relationships with each other, and to develop those relationships, as opposed to breaking them down with games of let's you and him fight, which is what I'm seeing right now.
Right.
So, yeah.
You know, another thing I've noticed over the last 10 to 20 years is that women, not all of course, but women are attacking men physically in the public square. They slap them, they yell at them, and they are really being violent toward men. And men have been told not to protect themselves, not to fight back. These women are punching them and just all kinds of things. What should men do when that happens to them? I would never put up with that. If a woman slapped me or hit me, she's going down. But I'm not weak like that. What do you recommend men should do in those situations?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know if it's a situation of weakness because the truth is that if a man fights back, he's going to probably be subject to state violence.
But he
and
should.
No matter,
I would be okay with that because I have a right to protect myself.
Yeah,
Men shouldn't
definitely.
be doing that to women, and women should not be doing that to men. But it's
Oh, no,
one-sided.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely one-sided. The reason why I would caution men who are in a situation like that to not strike back and to try to get out of the situation as quickly as possible and always be recording, so always have some like audio recording device on you, is that if you do strike back, you won't be granted the right of self-defense.
That's amazing.
By the legal system, and you will be drawn through the mud. And what will end up happening is the only thing that people will remember is the fact that you striked her, not how she physically or verbally assaulted you and provoked. And in some cases, and even saying that women provoke violence is verboten. You can't say that, even though a woman might be swinging with a freaking I don't know, a knife. And he just blocks her. You know, if she gets injured, she gets a black eye from the knife rebounding on her face. You know, and you say, well, she sort of provoked that. Everybody will dogpile on you and say, no, you can't possibly define the situation in those terms. So it's a very difficult situation for men. So if they are in a situation where they're being physically abused, I would suggest that they always be recording. They try to get out of the situation as soon as they can, and don't hit back.
So how about equal protection under the law? So maybe we as men and women like you, we need to change those laws where it's equal protection, because if women know that they can get away with that legally, they're going to only become more violent because there are no consequences for them.
Well, I think they already have.
Yeah.
And they've been getting away with it for a very long time. I mean, we had restraining orders in the 1800s. So this asymmetrical notion of violence has been around for a very, very long time. Yes, women do feel like they can get away, or some women, criminal women, feel like they are able to get away with this kind of violence. And the statistics bear them out. If the one study that I've seen that actually studied rate of reporting to police among men who are physically assaulted by their partners, found that if they report it to the police, they're more likely to be arrested than the woman who's assaulting them.
That's amazing. No, we got to change this. You know, we're out of time here. Tell the folks how to get to your radio show, your website, and follow you guys to see what you're doing there.
Well, everything comes together at www.honeybadgerbrigade.com. You can also find us on YouTube at Honey Badger Radio. And we also have a fundraising site, feedthebadger.com. So if you do like us, there you go. That's how you find us.
Well, thank you for the work you guys are doing, and I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much, all right?
No problem.